All right, welcome back to Problem Solver Politics. I am your host, Cardinellis, with Cody the Oracle.
Hey, everybody.
And today we're going to ask the question, who will win the Iowa primaries, the Iowa caucuses for the Democrat Party? Now, these primaries are completely different than any other primaries you've probably ever participated in, unless, of course, you are one of the Iowa delegates here. And if you look at traditional polling data and traditional models of doing business in politics, you would come to the conclusion that this is pretty much just a Biden and a Sanders party, and the rest of us are all just, hoping to get a seat at the party. This is just their world, and we're just living in it. However, that traditional thought doesn't really apply to a very untraditional and unorthodox way of caucusing, which is how they do the primaries in Iowa. So we're going to go over a little bit of the history of these primaries, what the caucuses are, show the data that would lead people to think a Sanders or a Biden victory based upon traditional orthodoxy, and then why that might just get tipped on its head and turned topsy-turvy, if you will, because of the irregular nature of the Iowa primary. So anyway, let's start out with the basics. Cody, show us what's going on.
Okay, so right now you will see in Iowa, this is the latest 538 Real Clear Politics snapshot. By and large, though, this is kind of what we're seeing across the board.
Of not the national, but just the Iowa.
Exactly.
This is the Iowa-specific data. Okay.
Iowa Democratic Presidential Caucus. And
awesome.
One thing that has definitely skewed the latest data is that a series of polls came out in the last few days with, I think, Bernie Sanders leading or tied for the lead virtually in all of them. And that's what leads to the massive Bernie surge you've been hearing a lot of people talk about in Iowa, which is going up right here. However, it is also worth noting that Joe Biden, after sustaining a pretty big hit earlier in the cycle, has recovered, and he's there. And we'll actually have some more data we can show you guys in a minute to get into the kind of the significance of, as you said, being 3% ahead of somebody heading into a caucus. There's a lot of variables left to decide how far behind you are.
Yeah. Basically, Biden has proven to be the dependable boyfriend that you went back to after the crappy psycho boyfriends failed. If you look at this graph, it seems like everybody had a period in time in which, the purple Buttigieg line went up and had his flash in the pan before he fell back down.
6-point lead over the field. Pretty crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So it looks like the first to peak was definitely Warren, but then she's had her steady climb. So she peaked, and then she ultimately went back down, costing Biden a little bit. And then Buttigieg peaked, and then he ultimately went down, costing Biden a little bit. And then now it looks like Klobuchar is kind of doing the same thing, but these all ended up being fading stars. They're like in World War I, when people used to have flares they shot in the sky in order to see stuff at night. The phosphorus can only last 30 to 60 seconds, okay? So these people have had their flare out moments, but there's really only been two candidates who have been consistently large and in charge in that top three. One of them traditionally getting ignored by the media, the other one not, virtually getting slobbered on by the media. Okay? So, in the traditional orthodoxy of politics, this close to the Iowa caucuses, we would look at it and we would say, what, Cody? Just if this were a normal primary like any other state in Super Tuesday, what would you probably say as an analyst looking at this data?
I would say it's wide open and anyone could win, probably.
Okay, that's Cody being far less arrogant. But actually, no, that's true.
Yeah, I mean,
a wise person would say
it's like 3 or 4 points. There's a bunch of people within 7, 9 points. It's like anyone can win that.
Yeah, a wise person would say the truth is when 4 people are this close, it's kind of a wide open primary. But you have to look at the trajectories, and the trajectory of Buttigieg is going down, and the long-term trajectory of Warren is going down, and there's only 2 that are maintaining steady and up there. So a more traditional or a more conservative campaign analyst would say, okay, this is a Biden/Sanders race. Okay. However, the guy that's leading, okay, generally and traditionally Biden, until recent polls, it's been Sanders. Okay. Really doesn't have the same enthusiasm that some of these other candidates do. And Iowa is such an interesting primary because they caucus. And for those of you that don't understand what caucusing is, okay, it's not your usual your usual election where you show up to this nice private booth and there's this little ballot waiting for you, or there's this punch card waiting for you, or you get to write your name and you stick it inside of this secret box, okay? None of that. You show up to this big room full of people, okay? Traditionally, it's at churches and libraries or community centers, but in the rural areas, there's over 1,500 caucus locations per precinct in Iowa. Some of them will be in people's individual homes, like in the barn out back, okay? So you're actually going to your neighbor's house in order to tell them they've got the wrong political candidate in their corner and you need to come over here. So you're literally going to this large location and you have to reach what's called a viability threshold. They pull everybody at the beginning, and if you don't have at least 15% of the people in the room, not 15% of the national poll, okay, not 15% of the state poll, or even of a precinct poll, if you don't have 15% of the people in that room right then actually endorsing the candidate you endorse, then in that room, that candidate is considered non-viable. And then you have to go to a different candidate's camp and your votes actually count for that candidate. Now, all of it, let's just say 10 candidate representatives show up, okay, at the caucusing location. And right off the bat, okay, 5 of the people are above the 15% threshold. 5 of the candidates are below the 15% threshold. Those 5 candidates, let's make a better number. Let's just say 4 candidates are above the 15% threshold. And then 6 of the candidates don't actually meet the viability threshold. They will actually have to either combine together to make their own 5th candidate above 15%, which is just barely possible mathematically, okay? Or they're going to actually, each one of them will have to peel off and join another camp. So you literally have people standing in these huddled corners, and then different delegates from these individual delegate groups will have to go out and say, hey, can you go convince those Cory Booker people who are now no longer viable to come into the Yang camp? And then the Bernie Sanders people will be looking over there and say, hey, look, man, those John Delaney people, they didn't make it happen. Try and convince them that the federal jobs guarantee is the way to go, you know? And all of a sudden you have literally a half an hour. They give you 30 minutes to try and convince these other candidates, delegates or delegation, that, okay, you should come with us now. And so the numbers get really, really weird. Okay. It brings the people that are front running oftentimes a little bit down, gives them a dose of humble pie, and then also actually gives somebody who's got a good platform that might be a smaller candidate, such as the Andrew Yangs, okay, who can have that great soundbite of, hey, we want to give $1,000 a month. Oh, hey, we want to have democracy dollars. Those kind of candidates can really, kind of like a vacuum cleaner, suck up all the other people who've either not been viable or have defected from other people's camps because you've convinced them, okay? So what that creates is a system where instead of the numbers ruling, intangible things such as the passion of the group rules, or the convincing nature of the representatives actually rules. And that's why now we actually have the most competitive caucus Iowa has seen in my adult life, at least, Cody. I mean, have you seen a time where there's been a more competitive? We've never had 4 viables all at once. The most we've ever had were 3. And so anyway, the Iowa caucuses actually provide us with some interesting data. A lot of people call them a bellwether. They're not a bellwether. However, they are 55% accurate in predicting the nominee of the Democrat Party through the caucusing system, and 43% accurate on predicting the GOP accuracy. Cody, where am I going wrong so far? Jump in.
No, I mean, just to your point, this is actually a graphic. We're doing some research. We pulled up. 538 put this together, which, of course, I'm sure a lot of you guys know. 538 does a lot of great work putting together exactly things like this. Graphs, graphics, things like that. I want to say infographics, but that aside, very interesting. So basically, it's tracking from 1980 through 2020 the amount of candidates within 10 points of each other in the Iowa caucuses. And one thing that's kind of fascinating, to me at least, is the fact that you'll notice it's basically a straight line up. It starts off where there was basically one candidate within 10 points of the front runner leading into like the end of the Iowa caucus season. every year except for once in 88, if we go back to 1980 till now. And then in the last decade or so, it's exploded, and now we're seeing in 2020 4 candidates. Here's the crazy thing. This isn't even talking about candidates we talk about a lot, like Andrew Yang, who I think is going to, I think where he's polling at and where he actually will reflect in the caucus is going to be, I think he's being underrepresented in polls.
Yeah.
So like there's other candidates in this weird mix here as well. So that was interesting to point out that even 538's taken a minute to look at this stuff and said that it's really, and I think they list it pretty well. Honestly, this is a pretty good way of saying it, and it's a nice little paragraph. They say, given just how close things are in Iowa, our forecast doesn't give anyone more than a 36% chance of winning the caucuses next week. But keep in mind, Nate Silver had a rough 2016 with forecasting. That being said, this got us thinking, how unusual is it for the field to have this many candidates within a few points of each other? Answer, it's pretty unusual. And that was the info. But like, seriously, this is something that even people, when you go back and start looking, because a lot of the times, I mean, especially how media cycles work today, dude, by the time we're getting a month or two away from the general election, no one will remember there was an Iowa caucus. This stuff gets forgotten very quickly. But when you look back, this has been a kind of remarkable period. And this is kind of getting to what you were talking about, larger the fact. This is something that has kind of been more of it. They've had candidates polling at 15 or greater than percentage points for a while. They've had multiple candidates like that. However, generally speaking, somebody's at 39 and blowing everyone out of the water. This year, as we highlighted, that's not really going on at all. I mean, they're basically there. I mean, Biden, like, if there's just an unfortunate distribution, actually, we had this pulled up. This is the one thing I want to show you guys. This is a article from The Hill. They've put a fascinating thing together here. So this is the Iowa Democratic caucuses mapped. Check this out. So there is a particular county, Bremer County, and Bremer is one of the 6 counties in Iowa that has voted for the winner of each of the last 4 Democratic presidential caucuses, and it has also voted for the winning presidential candidate in every November election dating back to 1980, which seems to be when a lot of data coming out of the Iowa caucuses
older than
starts,
I am.
1980. Yeah, but point being is, there is also something weird about, and this is true with any state, right? Especially you see this happen big time in the general as far as winning counties go. But when you're within 2 or 3 points with someone across the whole state, suddenly stuff like the distribution of your supporters in counties, are they too sparse? Are they too concentrated? Will determine to who actually wins the caucus, right? Like you could be polling at, like for example, Bernie could be polling higher than Biden, but Biden could just have the better distribution of supporters and win out. And I mean, here we go. They mentioned this. This can't be, maybe it's coincidence, but what, the last, how many caucuses have been since 2000, 2004, 8? Well, like the last 4 or 5 caucuses, these same 6 counties have picked the winner. That's pretty crazy, man.
Yeah.
Like, cause you'll notice there's plenty of counties in Iowa. The same 6 have picked the winner of the last.
Well, and I would
the last 20 years of caucuses. Pretty interesting.
I'd be really interested in seeing the demography of this, because what intrigues me about this whole thing and why the Iowa caucuses are so interesting to me is because there's an element in them that's just more human. Okay? Polling is very robotic. And it specifically puts a buffer between the human and the politician and the privacy of the ballot. But there's no privacy in caucusing. I mean, you show up blinged out, all right? And you have to be loud and proud, okay, about who you're representing. None of this quiet, I'm an Andrew Yang fan. Man, you better have that math hat on and one of the big rubber foam ones, right? So, okay, maybe you don't need a big rubber foam one.
There's nothing I hate more than privacy. Oh,
Yeah,
my God, privacy.
Well, but I mean, Cody, you have to ask yourself, why have these counties been such effective predictors in the caucusing process? I think it's because they force people to see the enthusiasm level of a candidate, okay? Katie Hill had a very big upset victory here against not only just an incumbent Republican, but, for lack of a better term, an incumbent Democrat who is the establishment Democrat. I mean, as a campaign, you have to give her credit for having had those 2 upset victories. And I was one of the few people that pegged her early. And the only measurable quantifier I had was I knew exactly who in town were all the little munchkin SJW protesters and activists and everything that would actually actively go out and knock doors. And she had them all. And so there's no real measurable quantifier that a poll would pick up on that with. But me as a human being, I sensed it. I was like, oh my gosh, she's got all the activists. And so I would actually put my money on the person that's got all the activists, because one activist can do what 15 paid door knockers can't do. Okay. But there's no measurable quantifier out there that you can pull on about, oh, are you an activist and who are you with? Because, you know, you can't self-identify that, or you can't even really identify that well unless you're there and you can sense them and you can see them. So the reason why I think the Iowa caucuses in these counties are probably so good is because there's an element there that hasn't changed since the 1800s, Cody. Once in 1916, the state of Iowa said, okay, we're going to go to a traditional ballot primary like all the other states. We're going to do it. But due to lack of enthusiasm, low turnout, and high costs, okay, they decided, no, we're going back to caucusing. So they're like one of the only states that does this. All right.
Multiple. I believe New York famously had a very controversial caucus in 2016 with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's a vast minority of states that do
weird,
this.
yeah. But I'm saying other ones do it.
And we consider it weird because it's not modern. But this was the way things were done in the 1850s, 60s, and 70s. I mean, Iowa's caucusing tradition goes back to a time when they were still a frontier state. You know what I'm saying? And there were parts of continental America that were called territories still. You know what I'm saying? Like, we still hadn't, we didn't have 48 out of our 50 states figured out at the time that they were already caucusing to figure out who their presidential nominee was. Okay? So there's a uniquely human process in that I think allows outliers a bigger chance. So the traditional orthodoxy would be, if this were a regular polling primary, that, hey, look, Buttigieg and Warren, they're trending downwards. Biden and Sanders are remaining steady or trending upwards, both of them. This is now just a two-man race. We can disregard the others. But because Iowa's an unorthodox and old-school caucusing system, I'm much more willing to say right now that, dude, this baby's wide open. I think this baby's wide open. What say you?
Yeah, very good, man. I mean, I will say we have, I think that this whole election is still, like I said, the biggest thing that stood out to me across the whole primary field, every state, everything, is the fact that, and the same goes to the Iowa caucus. We had some data pulled up. I had some data pulled up from, I think it was Vox. They were citing, I think 3 or 4 different polls. Still, the average poll is telling you 35 to 45% of people are unsure of who they're going to caucus for still. And I believe when it comes to confident in the candidate, I think Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren at roughly 60% support, as in 60% of their supporters will definitely caucus for them, is the highest according to some polls, which is, it's crazy to me. There's not that one, like 60% about as high as you get. They said amongst front runners. My assuming is that is, like if you're still supporting, well, I was going to say still supporting John Delaney, but if you're one of the plenty of people who still support Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang, even that probably doesn't even Klobuchar, but Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang probably the most. Like, you're not, I can't imagine 45% of people who are going to caucus for Andrew Yang are like, oh, maybe I will. I'm assuming if they said they're going to, it's like 80% are going to intend to caucus for Andrew Yang, right? When you get to bigger candidates, there is a bigger, and the one last thing.
But there's no way you could see.
But there's one last thing for Iowa.
Okay.
The interesting thing is, for Iowa predicting, as far as viability goes. Now, the thing with viability is, it doesn't really matter who Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders supporters would vote if their candidate wasn't viable, because by and large, they probably will be, right? For the most part. Maybe not everywhere, but by and large. But what's fascinating is there was a notion for a while that there was kind of people that supported Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, not at the same time, but kind of like Bernie, but if it looks like Warren, I can support her too. And that's what all the data and polls came, but all the data and all the polls comes from before Elizabeth Warren basically decided to go scorched earth on Bernie Sanders. Yeah. I think that might throw a ripple on things. I think there might be some people who found themselves on the fence and have now found themselves clearly on one side of that fence or the other. And I honestly think it was an intentional move by the Warren campaign to say, look, we have too many people that are Warren or Sanders, whoever's doing better, and we need to figure out who's who. And that's kind of what they did. So I think that's the other thing. And I think, I hate to say it from Miss Warren, but I believe that is why we see this just spike in the polls, is because she forced people to choose. And unfortunately for perhaps the whole field, if it leads to Bernie Sanders winning where he would have had more contested primary before, right? it looks like it was a bad decision. You know what's funny? I would say 95% of the time when you force someone to choose, there's a reason. Well, there's a reason why you hadn't done it before, because you kind of knew what the choice was. You kind of knew what they were going to say.
See, that's the human element that I'm talking about here that is unique to the Iowa caucus. So I got one question for you here, because I don't want to bury the lead 20 minutes into our video. Who do you think will win the Iowa caucus? Because I think in a traditional mindset, people would just say, oh, Biden or Bernie. And I'd actually have to look at like individual precincts and delegates before I chose between the two, because they're basically within the margin of error. It's very establishment heavy in Iowa, okay, because they've been spoiled by the establishment system for the past 50 years because they're an early state. So I might actually lean Biden a little bit. But at the end of the day, there's no way you could tell me in a room where 4 candidates have reached viability and one of those
4. Remember, that's it
or 5. Sorry.
What's interesting is, think about it. We haven't talked a whole lot about them, but Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg are polling fairly well in the state of Iowa. Like we can't pretend they don't exist. They are in the state, and they are.
But do you really think let's just say,
and on screen,
the Bernie group's going to totally out enthusiasm the Biden group,
but
the Yang group's going to out enthusiasm the Klobuchar group.
It's not necessarily an enthusiasm contest, though. Like there's people who've just made up their mind who they're going to vote for.
Enthusiasm matters. It doesn't matter in regular polling.
So you're telling me
it matters a lot more in the caucus system.
2016, these rabid Hillary fans were so loud and so proud they overwhelmed Bernie. I mean, dude, look.
Well, because there were no Hillary fans, there were anti-Trump fans.
But look at, oh my God, dude. Fine, maybe that's just the reason. I don't know why.
It was negative partisanship.
I don't know why it was so foolish. I'm just saying, look at the 2016 map, dude. I'm telling you, Hillary carried Iowa okay. It wasn't necessarily a sweep, but yeah. She walked away with it. And I would say maybe Biden will walk away with this one then, if we're seeing a lot of that. Because to go back to support, it's important. But, dude, like, it didn't help Bernie in 16. There were supporters not rabid in 16. Not rabid, I don't mean that in a bad way, but he did not have a fervent support base. Yeah. He always has. I honestly think the winner of Iowa will probably be Joe Biden. However, that's to say that I think we're going to see something happen like this. I think Bernie, unfortunately, isn't alone this time. I think a couple of those squares that are dark blue, a couple of those are going to be whatever color they give Yang. Couple of those probably whatever color you give Buttigieg. A couple of those might be whatever color you give, maybe not even Klobuchar, maybe 1 or 2. But I'm just saying, like, there's the sense that I think we're going to see basically this. Joe Biden more or less carries the state. However, I think it'll be closer to 50-50, and what used to just be kind of Bernie Sanders, because of how crazy his primary is, that's going to be broken up. Buttigieg, Yang, I think something like that's going to happen. I think it's going to be a bit of a... I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to wait a little bit further than Iowa to really figure out what's going on in this race, especially because, as you pointed out, one of the unique things about a system like that is you could have, in a particular community, a supporter base for a particular candidate, help them kind of
Also,
move up.
Bernie Sanders has never been the front runner, okay? He's always been in a position of underdog, allowing himself to punch up. He's never been the one that's been having to receive the punches from below and take incoming. He's been generally ignored, which is a different battle when the establishment ignores you. But he's never actually had to receive incoming political shells, right? And Biden's been doing that since the very, very beginning of this race. So I think that even if Sanders does book ahead, there's probably a lot of pastors that would come out of the woodwork. Democrats in Iowa are different. Like I was reading a stat that the majority of them still go to church on Sundays. So on and so forth. Whereas in New Hampshire, it's less than 1/5 of them do. You know what I'm saying? So the opinion of members of your congregation and of your faith group and so on and so forth has a lot more sway. Leadership in your community faith organization has a lot more sway to people in Iowa. And those people have never really probably had Bernie on their radar because he's never been a front runner. So we don't know exactly how they would react and what would be said in the Sunday before the Iowa caucus either. I don't think Bernie's ever been in a position to measure that either. So I think simply because he hasn't gone away yet and he's maintained his relative lead, except for in the past week, this whole time, I would also guess Biden as well.
How about one last thing to leave with? Oh, sorry, what were you saying?
I would say I would guess Biden, but I wouldn't rule out outliers having really awesome performances that give them momentum going into other earlier states that he can't do as well in.
Of course. I want to show you this. Sorry for interrupting.
Okay.
I want to show you. This is kind of interesting to me, at least. So here's a 2008 map, right? Again, Hill put this together. Of all the links in the description, please check his articles out. They're really cool. Anyway, the Hill put together a 2008 Iowa Democratic Caucus result map. And I want to look at Hillary Clinton here. Hillary Clinton is the darkest blue, right?
Yep.
So you notice Hillary Clinton did really well in this part of the state and then this kind of center area. So let's fast forward to when she actually won the state of Iowa in 2016. And we'll notice the part of the state where she had kind of dominated previously, right, is now been pretty well hijacked by Bernie Sanders. Really, she won with the majority of the state. She did not win in 2008. And it's almost like there's a large part of Iowa that basically votes mostly with, I don't know, put this. It's like they're loyal more to the party, or not like the party, but
the establishment. Or
whoever were the Hillary fans in 2008, they weren't the Hillary fans in 2016. I got to be honest, I can't say exactly why. I'm trying to word it in the sense that this tends to be big parts of the state can go either way. Like this is what up for grabs means. It means when Hillary Clinton actually wins the state of Iowa 8 years later, it isn't what the county she won 8 years ago. So it's hard to forecast. The best way of putting it, it gets tricky to forecast this stuff because a lot of things happen over time.
All right. We will find out February 3rd when all of this actually does indeed go down. Let us know what you guys think in the comments below. We want to see your guys' opinion. If you have any insider knowledge, or if you're there in Iowa and you're sensing something's different on the ground, by all means, please let us know. Check us out on Instagram at Problem Solver Politics, or on Twitter, where Cody gives all of our announcements at PSP Radio 1. Follow us on Twitter at PSP Radio 1. Check us out also in our live stream every Monday and Thursday. This is Problem Solver Politics. We'll see you guys in the next video.